Good afternoon, and welcome to Views with Joyce Waddell, and thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about the veto override in this segment. It takes 3/5 in order to override the governor's veto. The governor vetoed the budget, and as a result of that veto, it meant that Republicans and Democrats had to work together to come up with a compromise. Thus far, 2 months have passed, and that hasn't happened. It costs more than $42,000 a day to keep coming back to that General Assembly, and there is no vote on the budget. It's vitally needed because of many things that are there. So that means that the governor and the Republicans must get together to come up with a compromise so that we can pass a budget. We haven't done that. And so there was a big surprise in the House. When many were out because of 9/11, a historical event, talking about that event, meeting and looking at what happened as we commemorated that event. Talking about the tragedy that happened 9/11. The leadership in the House, Republicans, decided it's a time when we can put this budget vote on the floor. It's a time when we can override the governor's budget. Because look, we don't have a lot of people here. They were thinking we're not going to vote today. And that's what happened. They were able to override the veto. Now it's left to the Senate. In the Senate, there are 21 Democrats. And we must have everybody voting together in order to sustain the governor's veto. Everybody. We cannot lose just not even one member. We can sacrifice nobody. You can't be sick. You can't go anywhere because there'll be another surprise. If you're sick, you got to be there anyway. There have been members who've had to cancel vacations. In fact, one of our members is an attorney, and he had a plane trip. To work on a case and out of town. And look what happened. He had to cancel that plane trip. We never know, and we got to stay on guard. So we're going to talk about the veto and what it can mean and what happened on that dreadful day. Welcome, Corey.
Thank you for having me, Senator.
So we're looking at some things that happened in Raleigh about the governor's veto override. And it was a tragedy. Mm-hmm. And some of the things it says, while most Americans were remembering the lives lost on September 11th. September 11th was a dreadful day, wasn't it?
It was absolutely, I still remember it like it was yesterday. It was absolutely terrible.
Do you remember what you were doing?
Yeah, I was on the way to work, and my ex-wife and I, we shared one vehicle, and I dropped her off, and that's when you start hearing the stuff on the radio. And I went to work. There was a Radio Shack right underneath the place where I was working. And we all gathered around because we didn't have cell phones as much as prevalent as we do today. We all just gathered there and watched the towers just fall apart. And that's when it hit me. I got to get in the car and go pick up my significant other and go just to the house.
Were you in Charlotte then?
No, that was 2001, so I was still in Miami. But it was madness. It was the worst day as an American, I can say. It's obviously, we've got terrible events like Pearl Harbor and all, but in our generation, I think it was the Pearl Harbor of our generation, and it was just terrible.
Do you know, I remember what happened.
Yeah.
I was coming here.
You were coming to Charlotte?
Television 21.
Oh, you were coming right here?
Yeah.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes.
Wow.
And I was in my car right here at this station, and I was listening to the radio. And then I came in the building, and when I came in the building, the televisions were on. And we started watching it here at this station. And so everything was canceled that we were going to do. The programs, everything.
Yeah.
Because people didn't know what would happen next. We didn't know if, something
Yeah.
would happen in Charlotte.
And that's where for me it got scary because it was terrible to see what was happening in New York. But when I heard the Pentagon got hit, I was like, oh gosh, well this is going everywhere, So it could be Charlotte, it could be Miami, it could be anywhere. It was terrifying.
And we just never knew.
No, it was. And there was one more plane that didn't hit, that got taken over by passengers. That one supposedly was headed to the White House. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what happened. That's where people were.
Yeah.
While most of North Carolina's were remembering the loss on September 11, 2001, the Republican leaders in the General Assembly took advantage of a half-empty House and voted to override the governor's budget veto Wednesday morning. And you found out some other information about that, didn't you?
Yeah.
About what can happen and how devastating it could be.
Yeah, and I think that here's the part that I find distasteful, because things like this have happened in the past, where it's folks have waited for that moment to try to vote on something with the and excluding a certain group. But what I did find distasteful about this one is the fact that it was September 11th, and it was the reason they were out wasn't for any other reason than most of them being out commemorating the lives that were lost on September 11th. And to me, I just find that extremely distasteful.
And not only that, you want to take your Republican colleagues at their word when they say, we're not going to have a vote today.
Oh yeah, and
that you can work in your committees, you can work in the other things that you need to do as it relates to your job.
Yeah.
And so you take time to work in committees, to work with your constituent groups, because you have constituent groups coming to talk to you all of the time. Yeah. It doesn't matter what it's about, and it doesn't matter how large or how small. And I'm always happy to have people from Charlotte come in large numbers to talk. And I set up a press conference whenever they want to come so that we can talk about the things that matter in Charlotte. And so that's always exciting. So you take time to do things like that. You take time to listen to just groups of people who have an interest.
Yeah.
There are people who are coming to talk about medical issues. And I'll tell you, one of the strangest things that I've been dealing with, that I've had to deal with, there was one constituent had $250,000, and that was his life savings. And what happened to the $250,000? He invested it in the housing industry, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac,
Right.
in Washington. I didn't know they had some kind of investment group that goes along with that.
Yeah, I've heard about it. I was in the mortgage industry for a little bit, but that was a way back.
And you could invest like that?
I guess you can. I don't remember it clearly, but I was under the impression that you could.
Yes.
I don't know if you still can, but I guess maybe you still can.
And he said it came up to $450,000. 250 was now 450.
Bingo.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But then what happened next? President Trump, with the stroke of a pen, eliminated some of the procedures that went with it, and that $450,000 went back down to almost where it came.
Oh, that's terrible.
He wanted to know what could be done about it. So I said, while there's nothing that we do right here in this time that covers that, I will put you in touch with people who work with investments and the General Assembly staff that can work with you. And he said he's just devastated. He never got that money back.
How long ago was that? Was that recent?
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible.
About 3 years ago.
Gosh, and he still hadn't gotten it back, I assume.
No.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrible.
But it's hard to, and I come to things like that. People come to talk about things like that. And I've had people come to the General Assembly just crying.
Yeah.
I mean, old people, senior citizens, because of what has happened. In fact, 2 elderly women came, And they said they had been so dedicated to their party that they gave money all of the time, as much as $50 a month to the Democrat Party. They believed in what was going on. They believed in making a difference. They believed in change, and they believed in support. And to see things happen like this veto, they could not understand it. You give people your word, and you say to them, there will be no votes at this session. And so on Friday past, when we left on Thursday, they said to us in the Senate, you're gonna meet again at 9 o'clock in the morning, but there will be no votes taken. That's a public statement.
Right.
So we're thinking, can we trust you with this?
Yeah, and I think that's the issue. You know, as you said it best, right? We don't have to agree on everything as Democrats and Republicans, but we do have to have a level of professionalism and communication that is best going to be served for democracy. And that's where I think it's in poor taste because it's on 9/11, and at the same time, you're right. If you tell a colleague, we're going to meet, but we will not be voting, yes, sure, you're not saying it from the House, right? It's maybe over text message or however other fashion, but you'd like to take that at face value and say, they're telling me the truth. And, you know, I've worked with a lot of people in my career, and I'd say 90% of them, maybe of the ones I didn't agree with, we didn't agree, but I knew I could trust them, and if they told me something, I could believe that.
And not only that, a lot of Republicans weren't there. And see, as we read this, a lot of them weren't there. The House is allowed to conduct business with 61 of 120 members present, and there were 64 members present Wednesday morning.
Oof, just barely.
Just barely. Okay. And so Representative Swain made the motion to review the budget shortly before 9 a.m., according to what we see. And Moore dismissed objections from the Democrats present because Democrats didn't have the numbers.
Right. Yeah.
So when they say, no, I object, we don't want you to put this on here.
Yeah.
It takes 3/5 to over, and when they saw that they had the numbers,
Right.
and they saw that they could do it, that's when they moved forward.
And I heard, you know, from some reports that I read that some of the Republicans were even, they had people in the rooms at times, not in that session, but in others, that they were keeping an eye to see bathroom breaks, who was getting up, who was where, and to see that precise moment when they had it. And I think what they found was that precise moment when they had the 3/5 and the right amount, and they took advantage of it. I don't agree with it, but you know, strategically, it seems like they had a plan, and it's not the first time it's been done either.
Yes, the result was a veto override, 55-9. That's a very small margin, isn't it?
Yeah, 55-9.
55-9. And so Democrats said this is a tragedy. This is a tragedy. You're taking away the right. And so they didn't want people to be heard. They didn't want Democrats to be heard, so they turned off the mics.
I saw that in a video that was posted by, I think by John Autry, posted it. Yeah.
And so,
I mean, it's the antithesis of democracy, right?
That's right. So what happens? There are many things in the budget now that we need to have passed so that we can keep our state running, so that we can have the money still flowing to the groups and organizations, the municipalities that vitally need to keep it going. So what they've done is taken things out one part at a time to vote on it. And they can do that because they have they got the numbers.
Right.
In the Senate, we have 21, and we have 50 senators. So that they cannot vote us any day.
And we can't lose any, all 21.
All 21.
All 21.
For the budget. All
it,
21 must be there for the override.
Right. And so they,
So the only way they're getting around it is just pulling things out that they really want to have passed and putting them on the floor, budgetary items out, and putting them on the floor for a vote. And when they put it on the floor like that, for a vote and they've taken something that they really want to see happen, they can get it passed. But the big issue, the thing that bothers them more than anything, and the biggest holdup is Medicaid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the expansion of Medicaid.
Expansion.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people in this state that need health care.
Oh, yeah.
And they fall below, they fall in just like what you call a donut. They're making too much money to get private insurance, to get insurance in affordable care. And they're not making enough money. So that's what happens to them.
And that's the group that tends to get lost a lot, right? Even when we talk about, and this has nothing to do with Medicare, but when we talk about affordable housing here in Charlotte, we tend to talk about some of the folks under 30% AMI, which are desperate need. I totally agree. But what about if you're at 40 or 50% AMI, area median income? I mean, and you've got a family of 4 or 5, right? So same thing with Medicaid, right? I mean, Medicaid, where you have these folks that are, in need, right? I know people that don't have health coverage right now.
None at all, and
Right.
they can't afford it. They can't afford. They can't afford it
Right.
because of the amount of money that they make.
Yeah, I'm actually one of those people. I'm on a nonprofit salary. I make $15,600 a year. I've exhausted my savings account with the work I've been doing in the community in Queen City Unity. I don't have health coverage right now for the first time in my life, nor can I afford it.
And you know what happens when people don't have health coverage? They use the emergency room.
Right, yeah.
And when you go to the emergency room, they have to serve you.
It's thousands of dollars also. You get billed for it, but they're still going, right? They have to go. I mean,
They have to go.
so it's life or death, I'm going.
So they use that as their primary care physician.
Right,
So with people like you don't have health coverage
right,
because you make $15,000 a year.
correct. Yeah.
So what would happen if you made $7,000 a year? You'd be able to get Medicaid.
Right. But the kids would starve. So it's tough, right? It's that balance where it's like you're saying, there's,
You'd be at the very lowest.
Right.
You can get Medicaid.
yeah,
But if you're in the middle, like you're making 15, and so you don't have health care, are there many others like that in this state?
Oh yeah, there's a lot, and I think that's what this is trying to address, right? And that's why I think it's so important that we do expand Medicare, because there's so many people, great people, that if something happens to them, I mean, they're one tragedy away, and really to me it's about preventive care, not emergency room care. We want people to go to their primary care physicians, get checked up on, and not have to wait till an emergency breaks out. And that's what folks without health care tend to do, just wait till it gets to its worst.
And that's one of the big things that's holding up this budget.
Yeah, I know.
And so the Senate rules require 24 hours notice ahead for a veto override. They got to let us know 24 hours ahead.
Okay.
And that could be, sometimes they can call you, you can be called anytime, anywhere.
You could be across the country.
Yes.
Right.
We had to bring one member back by plane
Wow.
because we thought a vote was going to come
Yeah.
up.
It's like, hurry up. Did they parachute in?
Literally.
Literally.
They had to bring Jeff Jackson back
Oh, it's Jeff. Wow. That's
because we thought the vote was going to take place and we needed everybody. So this is how it goes. A quorum is required for a vote. There's 26 members for a
Right.
vote, just a plain vote. Veto override requires 3/5 of the members present. If all 50 members are present, we need all 21 members, all 21 Democrat senators to vote to sustain. And so this is what happened. They started looking around at these 21 and say, oh, you live in this part of the state. And these are some things that are in the budget for your communities.
That's it.
And you'll be surprised at some of the rural communities. Water is
Right.
an important issue.
So
Just plain clean water. And they have a system of water purification that the budget help provide for these communities. As you ride down through some of these communities, there are a lot of things that we take for granted that they suffer for. And so they put a lot of things in the budget for them. And then they say, okay, if you're not going to vote for this budget with us, then your community is not going to get this.
Right. So they're using that as the hook
That's the hook.
to get one of the 21.
That's right. So they're
vote.
basically holding you hostage.
Right. Yeah, it's,
And as we think about our committees, like I serve on transportation, finance, aging and pensions, education appropriations, and then the prison reform, and then a special committee on housing. And so none of us in the Senate chair any of the committees, not even one. Not even a vice chair of any of them. So they may come up and say to you, in the future, if you want to chair a committee or be a vice chair of a committee, you need to vote for this budget.
so they're always trying to find some reason.
Now,
Yeah.
who wouldn't want to?
Yeah.
Right now, we have no Democrats serving in the Senate
Yeah. Wow.
as a chair or vice chair. So you don't preside over any committee.
Yeah.
You have to sit there, and you can be in a discussion
Sure.
and get things done through discussion, and maybe through, if they want to, and maybe through some negotiations, but you don't chair it.
Yeah. You could try to influence, but you don't
Yes.
have
No.
right the
No.
actual. Yeah. I think it's a time where it's, and like you're, in going through examples like that, Senator, it's so important though that we do stick together. That the 21 stick together, because I really believe it's
And you
that
got to make a
important.
sacrifice often for your
Right.
communities.
You have to, and sometimes there's victory in sacrifice, and there's sacrifice in every victory, right? And in everything, for every justice that's done, there has to be some sort of sacrifice. And I know it'll be tough for some of the 21 that'll say, "Gosh, my community really needs that." But we got to think holistically, and that's challenging. It's easier said than done.
Artists, we'll continue to talk with Jose JMillares as we talk about the veto override and what happened in Raleigh when Republicans put forth a vote to override the governor's veto, and they were successful in doing so. And they waited until a most opportune time when they had 55 and 9. 55 yes votes and 9 no votes. They knew it was a vulnerable time. Many of us were at meetings honoring first responders who gave so much of their time, their lives on the line, and energy for 9/11. And this was a time when 9/11 was in our minds again, thinking about the horrible experiences and hoping it would never happen again. But there was another horrible experience, and that was on the floor in the General Assembly in the House when this vote took place. And so now we have to be on guard almost each and every day to make certain that in the Senate that does not happen, that there is not an override ever again under our watch. And so many people didn't want to go home.
They just stayed. Huh?
Yeah,
Wow.
because when they say it's a skeletal session, what that means, it's not going to be any votes. They're going to be reading in any bills filed or anything that's going to happen. But when we left on Thursday, they said no votes. So, you want to take them at their word that there are no votes.
It's hard to do that today.
It's very hard to do anything like that. And it's what you call deceit. It's a new level of deceit that we haven't seen in a while. Now, Republicans took over the General Assembly in 2011, and they're still holding on to it. We had, for a long time, for 5 years, we've had like 15 senators, 15 out of 50. That's not a lot. That's 35 that they have, and we had 15. Until this past election cycle, 15 isn't.
Yeah, it's not a lot at all. And I think it's.
And I've never been in a place where people would talk to you any kind of way, just disrespectful.
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing a lot more of that in politics these days and in government, unfortunately. people feel the need to really express themselves. And it resonates with some voters, but I think we need to get back to an era where we can say what's on our mind. We can speak our mind, but we got to do it respectfully.
I think it's intentional, and it's a way of embarrassing you.
Yeah.
It's a way of letting you know that they are in charge.
Yeah. It's a form of bullying almost, right?
Yes, it is. Letting people know in no uncertain words that they are in charge. And so they talk to you any kind of way. And they often refer to us, you people, on the back row.
Really? Wow.
And that's the way we're seated. All of the senators, it's 2 rows, a front row and a back row. All of the senators on the back row. And they refer to you people on the back row. And that's intentional. And they say to us, now when you were in charge, you did what you wanted to do, the way that you wanted to do it. And now that we are in charge, we're going to do what we want to do. But I'm hearing it was never, even when Democrats were in charge, it was never as blatant and as disrespectful as what we see in the General Assembly today.
Yeah, that's absolutely terrible. I mean, imagine having to work in that environment, right? We always talk about work environments. In this case, you're servants, right? You're serving the community. You mean well, and to have to deal with that level of disrespect, I can only imagine how just poor that. I mean, that has to just be a poor experience, And you're right. I can't imagine that it was to this level, but it seems like a lot of revenge tactics from what I'm hearing, and it's just. It's a tough period here in North Carolina for us as a state, but I think the best is yet to come.
Well, we hope, and I think what you're doing is going to be one of the pieces that's going to make a difference.
Well, thank you,
with
Senator.
your organization.
I really appreciate that.
Your caucus.
Yeah, Hispanic Democrats of Mecklenburg County. Yeah.
Hispanic Democrats of Mecklenburg County. I think you're going to be making a big difference in what we're going to be seeing. Because many times when you see things locally happen, those are the same things that you can see that will translate to the state. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, Senator.
And audience want to thank you for being with us as well. On Views with Joyce Waddell. Tune in again next week for another interesting program. Thank you.
Thank you.